at Xavier University, and welcome to our June 3rd Thursday Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Marla Phillips, and I'm the Director of Xavier Health. For those of you who are new to this program, I'd just like to share that the goal of this Lunch and Learn is really to bring in topics that are outside of your normal workday. In some cases, it's a wow type of topic. In other cases, it's a did you know? But it's all there to help you understand some of the driving forces of what's going on around you as you do your daily work. So basically, we're working to I guess, increase your awareness of what's going on, increase the wisdom that you have as you're doing your job. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Our mission at Xavier Health is inspiring collaboration, leading innovation, and making a difference. And we do this in a number of different ways. On the next slide here, you can see that we actually have over 150 pharmaceutical professionals, medical device professionals, and FDA officials involved with us in any number of initiatives or conferences or development that we're leading. You can see down below in green, the third Thursday Lunch and Learn is part of our development arm of what we do, along with a medical device webinar training toolbox. But up above, we have several conferences, and even if you have joined us, some of these are brand new. We've been approached to see if we can lead some new areas. So you might be familiar already with our PharmaLink conference, our MedCon conference. Both are co-sponsored by FDA. But also we have an Artificial Intelligence Summit that we are starting in August. We have our Combination Product Summit that will be the third annual summit that we will host in October. And our Cybersecurity Summit, the Combination Products one is in September. The Cybersecurity Summit is in October, and I hope that you can join any one of those. Out of those conferences and summits, we actually work to lead initiatives. So now that we're all together at the conferences, let's get together and do something where we can tackle an industry challenge and develop solutions that can be used across the industry and with FDA. So if you're not aware of some of the things we're doing, please take a look at our website, and I hope that you'll be able to join us in any number of those. So before I begin, though, I would like to say that today's webinar, and I'll introduce Dr. Linda Gravett here in a second, but the webinar is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be available on our website soon after the webinar. We'll flip the website within the next day or two. We will also end with a Q&A session today. So in your webinar panel on the right side of your screen is typically where it is. You'll see a little panel for questions. Please go ahead and type in your questions as the webinar is occurring, so then it will come to us. We'll have it for the end of the session. It will not distract Linda at all while she's presenting, and we'll be able to ask the questions for you at the end of the session. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Linda Gravett is founder and senior partner of Gravett and Associates. She has consulted with many organizations, including Boyce, Dole, and Williams-Sonoma over the past 20 years. She helps them leverage a diverse workforce that we all are experiencing to ensure success. Dr. Gravett is a frequent speaker at professional conferences on the topic of human resources management ethics, emotional intelligence, and leveraging workplace diversity. She is the author of Human Resources Management Ethics, Perspectives for a New Millennium, and co-author of Bridging the Generation Gap, Using Your Emotional Intelligence to Develop Others. Just a Couple of Women Talking is another book, The Real Story of Being a Woman Entrepreneur, which is co-authored with Terry Bonner-Stewart. And then also the book, Leadership and Balance, New Habits of the Mind, which she co-authored with John Kusha of Xavier University. Dr. Gravett has lived and worked in Japan, Canada, and Mexico, and that's the reason I'm bringing that up, is as she's looking across generations, just explaining that she really has fantastic experience in the diversity that exists across the workplace. She has a PhD in industrial psychology and a master's in labor and employment relations and a bachelor's in accounting. So welcome, Linda, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today to share with us some insights on the strengths and weaknesses of the generational differences in the workplace.
It's my pleasure.
Great. So with that, I'd like to start the interview. What are the generations that exist in today's workforce, and what defines them?
There are actually 5 generations in today's workforce, and each of these generations is defined by sociologists and researchers like myself by their influences growing up, and that is between the ages of 6 and 18 years old. And there are probably many different ideas on who those generations are. However, generally there are some accepted age groups as we define them. And most sociologists and educators and researchers define first the silent generation, also called the radio babies, and they are between 72 and 92 years old. They were dubbed radio babies because when they were between the ages of probably 6 and 12, there was no TV. They were sitting around in the living room or the kitchen, the radio, and that was their entertainment. The next generation would be baby boomers, and called baby boomers because this group between 53 and 71 has 77 million people. So Johnny came marching home from World War II, and one of the ways he and Mrs. Johnny celebrated was by having lots of children, 77 million of us. The Generation Xers, who are between 37 and 52, were named by a Canadian novelist who was himself a Generation Xer, and called Xers because he felt at that time that this was a generation who didn't know quite what they wanted to do, what they wanted to contribute to the world. Generation Y, or the Millennials, is a group that's between 22 and 36 years old, often dubbed at the beginning Generation Y because they ask a lot of questions. Ask Generation X and the boomers and the silent generation, why do we do things this way? And then the generation that's just coming into the workplace now in part-time positions in high school and just getting out of college is called Generation Z, or I generation, or post-millennials, or linkers. Any of those are the same. And I'd like to give a little bit more detail about each of these generations, because for those folks that are listening that have people in different age groups that they work with, and they might be wondering, who are these people and what do they want? The silent generation is often called this because there's that sense that I think is inaccurate, that there's not much that they have to talk about, that they're retiring or have long since retired. They really don't have anything to contribute to the conversation today. Later on, I will say a little bit more about why I think that is definitely a myth, because what I've seen is that this generation is still viable. Many are still in the workplace, and that's more than just as Walmart greeters. They are really contributing a great deal. They were influenced by the Great Depression and World War II, and so they can really relate to deprivation and sacrifice. Many in this age group appreciate tradition, appreciate loyalty, particularly on the part of employers, and they will be very loyal to employers. And their mantra is, if I had to say there's a mantra for them, you get a job, you keep a job. This is an age group I like because they're going to be making sure those cartridges are used, those ink cartridges, to the very last drop. The next generation are the boomers, and this is a wide age group between the 50s up to the early 70s, and likewise they are often called the black and white TV babies because there was no color TV when the oldest boomers were born, and the color TV babies on the later end in the 1960s. They grew up in times of great societal change, especially in the 1960s. Think about the legislation around civil rights, about women's rights. The pill became popular, and so women had some control over how many children if they chose to. So the mantra, if I had to give a mantra for the boomers, would be, you work hard, you pay your dues, and if you're going to get ahead, it can't be just because you show up. You have to make some contributions. Generation X was named by Douglas Copeland, the Canadian novelist I mentioned, and he felt that this was a generation that still, at the time he wrote this book in 1991, had a lot to prove. Now Gen Xers are running corporations. They've made many contributions to the workplace and to the world around them. They were shaped by a couple of factors that were personal factors, most notably that they're more likely to be the children of dual career couples or even of divorce more than previous generations. One of the reasons that they are leery of or cautious about authority figures is because they became disenchanted back between the mid-'80s and mid-'90s when their parents were getting downsized, right-sized. They're getting kicked out of organizations. And so they really don't have a sense that they're going to stay with the company for more than a few years. They're going to probably start their own organization. This is an age group that grew up with technology. We think so much that the Millennials and the Gen Zers are the only ones that are comfortable with technology. Actually, the Gen Xers are very comfortable with technology too. Their mantra is, tell me what the mission is, tell me what you want me to accomplish, and then don't hover over me. Get the heck out of the way and let me do my job. The Generation Y or Millennials relate the most to the radio babies or the silent generation because the radio babies, they feel, built the infrastructure of our country and our organizations and are very integrity and value driven, as are the Millennials. So if you want to have somebody in your organization who is going to be the big brother or big sister or the coach or the mentor, if you still got radio babies around, that's the group to connect. This is a group that is very street smart, if you will, very savvy about the world around them because they are hooked in through technology literally immediately to what's going on. This is a group that watched when they were younger planes going into a high-rise in New York and school shootings. So unfortunately, for that reason, they're very safety oriented and want to make sure that where they work and the schools for their children are completely safe. This is a big interest for them. Their mantra, that why question, why do we have to do it your way? We're smart. We know a thing or two. Generation Z, we're still learning a lot about because the youngest ones are 12 years old. However, we've got some high school Gen Zers who are at work and those just coming out of college, and they're accustomed to a fast pace, a lot going on at the same time. No, they don't all have ADD. It's just that they're used to play dates and school activities and having 2 or 3 things going on at one time, multitasking. They're very close to their parents and their family members. Many of them not only live at home now, the ones that are out of college are coming back. And this is also true of the younger millennials. They really want to stay close to home. They too have a very close link with technology. That's why they use technology to network with other people, and that's why they're called linkers. The one coachable opportunity is that they don't, by their own admission, handle conflict well. They'll text anything that's on their mind to discuss issues that they have, but they won't necessarily face-to-face say, so, Marla, I have a problem and we need to talk about it, but they'll text it. Their mantra, because they've been treated very well and are adored by coaches, parents, aunts, uncles, friends, I'm just wonderful. Accept it. I'm here. Aren't you lucky?
Okay, that's very entertaining. Okay, so what are some myths and truths your research has discovered about the generation?
Well, I'll start with the boomers because I'm a boomer. One of the myths is that we are not capable of learning technology, that we don't want to learn something new, when in fact many of us boomers grew up in changing times, grew up with technology, really believe in and subscribe to its value, and are actually learning new technology every day because we want to keep up with the kids. The next myth that I would mention would be that Gen Xers, because they tend to, more often than other generations, be very blunt, very straightforward, that they're just complaining all the time and that they're not necessarily easy to get along with. They want to complain about the world around them when indeed they're very concerned and want to work for organizations like Habitat for Humanity, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the YMCA, the YWCA. So they do care about the world around them. They're not just complaining. And then the next is the Gen Yers and Millennials. That myth is, well, what do they know? They don't have any experience. They're just still wet behind the ears, as I've heard a lot of radio babies say, when indeed this is an age group that's very educated, very tech savvy. They can make a significant contribution. I've run into so many Gen Yers, Millennials in fund drives, running marathons, serving as tutors, very active, very engaged.
Okay, great, thank you. So what is important to understand about how each generation communicates?
What I'd like to really tune into is the message that grabs the attention of each of the generations. This slide also shows some of the ways that people prefer to communicate. However, I think what's most important is the message that's going to grab their attention. With the radio babies, this is an age group that you get their attention by saying, I appreciate the fact that you've been around the block a time, or 50, and that you have expertise. You have experience, and I want to learn from you. If you say something like that, then more often than not, radio babies will share and communicate with you as long as you want, maybe longer than you want. The boomers want to know, how can we work as a team? Because remember, this is a big age group. They're used to crowds, and they want to improve processes and know how we can do that working collaboratively together. The Gen Xers, best communication messages: tell me the results you want, get out of my way, I'll let you know if I have any questions. The Gen Yers, Millennials, what's efficient, what's clever, what can we do using technology in a way that is new and different. The Gen Zers, you get their attention if you're telling them, how am I doing? They want recognition, they want praise, they want to know on a frequent basis, like every day, what am I contributing? Am I doing okay? There is one more piece of the communication that is on the next slide that I want to mention, and that is that each of the 5 generations typically responds differently to conflict. And I just want to take a moment to say, I'm not saying that every generation walks in lockstep formation and that every silent generation member, every boomer, every Gen Zer responds, for instance, to conflict in the same way. It's just that because of our influences growing up, there tend to be similarities. So the silent generation, if it's an older member of the silent generation and they're in authority, they may not be so open to confronting authority, so we have to ask for their input proactively. The people that are in authority in the silent generation are accustomed to calling the shots, and if we want to persuade and influence them in our communication, we need to bring data and facts. The boomers have comfort in numbers, prefer to have a team consensus, and if there's some kind of conflict or disagreement, they're more likely to say, let's get people together on the phone. Let's get people even preferably around the table and see what different people think. The Gen Xers are going to bring the truth, and they're going to be blunt, and so they expect that they can be straightforward, and they expect that from other people. So when there's conflict with Gen Xers, it's often around, ooh, that person was so straightforward that they hurt my feelings. And particularly if it is a Gen Xer and a Gen Zer who isn't so accustomed to somebody saying something that is very blunt and is going to hurt their feelings. So the Gen Yer Millennials, they want to be heard. They want to be able to ask why do you feel that way? Why do you disagree with me? And have an opportunity. They like to sit down with those baby boomers and reach the consensus. The Gen Zers, looking for some coaching around, how do I get behind and away from the telephone, and how do I talk to a person face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball.
Right. That's wonderful. I mean, just such amazing insight, because I know this topic came up as we were planning the PharmaLink conference last summer when we were planning it for the March conference. And just all the conflict, or how do I work with this person, or they have the attention span of a gnat. We kind of heard that kind of stuff. So it's a real pain point, I think, for a lot of people, and for you to be able to tear it down into the strengths and weaknesses, then it makes it more, it gives people tools that they can use to work together in a more effective way. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. And I think the key to follow up with that point is that we all have something in common. So if we're sitting around the table or we're sitting around a mission, we all have that in common, and that's more important than the differences.
Right. And speaking of sitting around the table, so one question I have that I think is on the minds of a lot of people is, in a typical work setting, you're going to have teams formed for a whole bunch of different reasons. So are there certain roles that you see the different generations tending towards? And then depending on the purpose of the team, I guess, would you say that any one generation is more suited for a leadership role on those teams?
What I found is that, of course, depending upon what you want out of the team dynamic, there are some roles that might be better suited. Today, it's going to change over time. Today, if you want strong leadership, you want someone who's self-confident, and you want somebody who has a sense of direction because they've had this experience before, then I would definitely look to a radio baby. If you want someone who is adept and comfortable with building consensus, seeking collaboration, and doesn't have to be the boss of everyone, then a baby boomer would be strong in that arena. If you want somebody who is going to take charge because he or she is definitive, concrete, and wants action, then a Gen Xer is going to be a good candidate for that. The Millennials and the Gen Zers have just enough experience so that they're not tired of the topic and are going to have some energy. So if you want energy and drive, then certainly the younger Gen Xers and the Millennials, and particularly the older Gen Zers, are going to be the best.
Yeah, so I think for those on the phone and those who might be listening to this much later on after it's recorded, if you're in charge of putting together a team, for you to think through what type of leader do you want, because you might be sitting around the table and then someone volunteers to lead, and it's not going to be the right leader for that situation. I think the younger generations, they've got a lot of ways to challenge status quo, and that might be perfect for something. But you don't want that person leading something where you really need to have this whole huge big picture understanding and lots of years of experience behind it. So I think if you're in charge of putting the team together, you're going to want to make sure you think through what are you trying to accomplish and which generation could lead this well.
I couldn't agree more. What's the objective of the team, and what kind of dynamic do you want around the table?
Great. Okay, and so we do have some questions coming in from the audience, and if you haven't submitted a question and have one, go ahead and do that now. No need to wait any longer. So the first question is, do you see the Gen Y and Gen Z groups evolving or growing as they gain more experience? And the handling conflict point seems interesting, and it may change as they gain experience.
Great question. I do see the generations evolving, just like the radio babies and the boomers and the Xers before them had to evolve. When I was in my early 20s as a baby boomer, I remember hearing several times from the radio baby generation, this younger generation is a bunch of hippies. They don't have any sense of order, and they're just going to take us to hell in a handbasket. I heard that phrase many times. So I'm observing in my work and in the focus groups that I'm doing and the interviews that I'm doing that the older Gen Yers are certainly getting some experience under their belt, learning how to handle disagreements in a more professional way, and the Gen Zers, I have every confidence, will be able to do the same.
Great. Okay, thank you. So have you been able to observe if the generational differences you talked about today apply globally, or is it culturally based, like you're talking about in the United States? It's like this.
Most of my research has been in the United States and Canada, although I have been doing some research in the East as well, Far East as well, and I have found that the time frames might be different, yet there are still some of the same challenges. For instance, many of the people that we would say are Gen Yers and Millennials in Japan, in the Philippines, in parts of China, are looking for change, are looking for more casual ways of making decisions in the business place, and the people that we would call the silent generation or radio babies are resisting that and saying we need to follow tradition and we need to be more formal. So yes, there are definitely generational differences across cultures.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so this next question is a little bit long. So the grouping by generation applies to communicating definitely across the age groups. But when it comes to motivation at work, does Dr. Chris Argyris' theory of adult personality and Maslow's hierarchy of needs still apply to motivating people?
There are some differences across the age groups when it comes to motivation. For instance, let's talk about recognition, which the researchers you mentioned will say, you know what, when you're trying to foster an environment of motivation, you have to recognize people. And I believe that is true, yet the recognition is going to be different for a boomer than for Gen Zer. A Gen Zer wants something that is instant gratification. Give me the cash. Gen Yer might say, it's okay if you want to wire some money to my bank account. And the radio baby, older baby boomer is going to say, give me a trophy and give it to me in front of the team.
Right. Give me a trophy in front of the team. I love it. Okay. So another question says, I've felt a sense from Gen X that many companies have bent over backwards to accommodate millennials as they started rising. Do you see that just as a natural order, meaning the older generation always says, oh, you know, everybody's just, you know, trying to appease you, and, you know, or is there something more to that?
I think that appeasement notion is part of the factor. And with regard to Gen X, this is the one generation, I think, for many reasons. One of them because it is a condensed generation due to technological changes, that there aren't as many people in Gen X. I think this is a generation that has sometimes been neglected, in that the Gen Yers started coming along, and then Gen Z came along, and there were so many of the baby boomers that Gen X has been neglected in terms of what they can contribute, what they would like out of the workplace, and what they need in order to stay with the organization. So in terms of recognition and fostering an environment, learning agility and coaching and mentoring, I think we need to do more for Gen Xers so that they will stay.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to something that I think is great. So the question is, you should write a book on these topics. And I fully support that, and maybe this person missed the intro, so I'll let you comment on that. But for those of you who have joined us in the past, you might know that our speakers can be anywhere in the world, but Dr. Gravett is here in Cincinnati, so we're sitting together in the same room, and it's just such a pleasure having someone like you here, and to gain the wisdom that you have created through your research over so many years, and really see the value in how it transcends everything we're doing at Xavier Health, which is why we had you give a session like this at PharmaLink.
Right.
But why don't you comment on, should you write a book about these?
Well, as a matter of fact, in 2007, I researched and then co-authored a book using my research with somebody who is a Gen Xer. Her name is Robin Throckmorton, and I kept doing research. After that book was published by Career Press in 2007, by focus groups, one-on-one interviews by phone and in person, the generations, the four generations, the older generations, and then I've been doing research in the past couple of years with Gen Zers to do the second edition of Bridging the Generation Gap. And as a matter of fact, I've been fortunate enough to have 6 books published in total on leadership, on business management ethics, on learning agility, emotional intelligence. In every book, there is a discussion, at least a couple of chapters, about the generations and how those topics relate to the generations.
Great. Okay. Yeah, it's hard to get away from it.
You really can't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Do you recommend communicating with people by a variety of ways? Discussion directly, email, text, or maybe the question could also be knowing how these generations prefer to communicate. Should you just stick with that, or do you try to push them out of their comfort zone? Or as a leader, how do you manage that?
As a leader myself, with 50 employees, I try to push myself out of my comfort zone first. But I'm tweeting now every day, and I am trying to get a handle on Instagram and Snapchat. And I think it's good for younger people to learn how to use other mediums as well, to feel more comfortable eyeball to eyeball, sitting around the table. So I think as leaders, we should encourage across mediums, different kind of communication.
Right, that's great. And I'll try not to interject personal stuff, but so my oldest son is 15, and so huge into texts and things like that.
Sure.
So trying to get him more comfortable with communicating face-to-face, I would ask him a question and say, now think about it, and then when you're ready to respond, let me know. And so we give him a chance to collect his thoughts, because as he's texting, it can take as long as he wants, right? So I'm trying to teach him how to communicate verbally, because it's not natural. They don't have to think on their feet like that sometimes.
Exactly.
So it's fascinating. I love psychology.
So do I.
I've done that instead of chemistry. So, okay, so that's all the questions we have from the audience. There was a question about the webinar demand toolbox, and I can send you a link to that. But for anything that I talked about at the beginning, as far as the initiatives we're leading, you can go to xavierhealth.org. And we are also very close to launching a brand new website, and it will look so much better and be so much easier to navigate. So, but for now, you can find it on the website, but we'll try to send that to you in advance as well. But I just want to thank you again, Linda, for being here and sharing this. And I know that the information you shared will really help everyone who is online. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Okay.